us for our Washington College Grant Financial Aid Update with Yokiko Hayashi Sayero from WASFA, Washington Student Achievement Council. So just wanted to do a quick introduction. I am going to mute all of our participants until Yokiko asks for verbal participation. For that reason. All right. So you all are all muted for right now. When Yokiko asks for verbal participation, I will unmute everyone. But until then, feel free to drop your comments in the chat and we'll respond. I'll let Yokiko know when there are questions for her. And we do plan to record this session. We'll be sharing out all presentations with all Washington Passport Network members in the coming weeks. So if you have an issue with being recorded, please let me know, send me a private chat. But besides that, I'll hand it over to Yokiko to get started. Thank you all for being here. Hold on, I'm gonna unmute you. Did you get notice to unmute, Yokiko?
Unmute. Unmute.
Perfect.
Am I unmuted? Okay, great. So thank you, Essence. Thank you, Angie, for helping me facilitate today. I really appreciate it. Again, I'm Yokiko. I work at the Student Achievement Council, and I work with the College Bound Scholarship doing the communication and outreach, but really a part of my work is just ensuring that students have access to state financial aid opportunities. So hence, we're talking about the Washington College Grant and state financial aid in Washington State. But before I go on and talk about this presentation and sort of get into the nitty-gritty, I want to let you all know I talk about financial aid as my favorite F word because it's complex. It is not easy. It is very layered. And so before I get into the presentation itself, I actually would like to ask the group if you could do it via reaction so I can just sort of see if you guys are comfortable with financial aid. Could you give me the thumbs up? And if not, okay. Okay. So I'm seeing just a small fraction of thumbs up, which is good. So I just didn't want you all to feel like I'm talking to you like you've never done financial aid before. So some of this will be very superficial, very topical, and then we will get into a little bit more of the intentional, more nitty-gritty details. So thank you for doing that because it just gives me an idea of who I have in the room. So I am starting really with, well, why am I talking about financial aid? So if you are working with anybody who is in high school or working on completing their high school diploma or high school completion in general, and we're thinking about, well, what are your next steps, right? We're always talking about next steps. How are we preparing our students? What are we doing? And a really big component of this is financial aid. So financial aid matters because students who don't complete a financial aid application, or students who do, complete a financial aid application are more likely to enroll in a college. And I think what's really important for us to think about is that that is a really big barrier that we know has a process and resources to help support them kind of break through that wall. And we are here, that's why I exist, that's why our 12th year campaign exists, that's why a lot of the resources at college campuses exist to ensure these students have access. And this process really does eliminate a lot of barriers for students. So that's the why financial aid, because it ultimately can lead to better outcomes for our students. When I say financial aid, I want to be very, very clear that I am talking about financial aid as a whole. So I would say, you know, when you think of financial aid, what do you think of? Most people tell me they think of loans, right? They're thinking about money they have to pay back. They may think of scholarships. But when I say financial aid, I really am talking about this umbrella term of financial aid, which is any means that a student uses to pay for school. So for financial aid, that could be grants, those are income-based. They come from the federal or state or institutional level. So they're either coming from federal government, state government, or that actual college. Then there's scholarships. Those are merit and income-based. They can come from public, private, and nonprofit sources. So they're kind of coming from all over the place. Then there are those loans, income-based, federal, and private. And then lastly is work study. And work study is a really amazing opportunity for students. So it's a component of financial aid that students can access if they become employed by a work study office. So that could be working on a college campus, that could be working closely with a campus partner, but this is essentially aid that students can access if they are employed, and it's a really great opportunity for students to get hands-on work experience while also being a student, but it values them as a student first and not as an employee first. So that's really crucial, because when a student is in school, you want them to be able to focus on their schooling rather than their working, because that is how we ensure that they have success in the post-secondary world. So financial aid is really all of those encompassing terms that come together. The next big umbrella term is like, well, where does financial aid come from? Because it's coming from loans, it's coming from grants, scholarships. So where are these funding sources coming from? The federal government, that is done through the FAFSA. So students who are accessing federal financial aid are able to be reviewed for federal level aid. There's also funding that comes from the state itself. So like the Washington College grant, that is a state form of financial aid. Then there is institutional, so that's just done by the college itself. And then there are those organizations. So you'll see that there is a lot of overlap between where the sources of aid come from and what financial aid is. Who gets financial aid? This is a really great question. So, well, now that we know where it comes from, well, who has access to it? So students apply for financial aid to help them pay for their college expenses. They do that by applying with either the FAFSA, in Washington State specifically, with the FAFSA, which is the free application for federal student aid, or the WASFA. And so that is for our students who are undocumented or do not have a federal status, but are residents of Washington. Financial aid varies by a student's need. So when I describe financial aid to students and their families, I think of it as a thumbprint, because it is based on that student's financial aid application, which is unique to them and their circumstance, and the school that they plan to enroll in and their cost of attendance. So no one student's financial aid should look the exact same as their best friend, even their brother or sister, because you just don't know where that student is going to enroll. So it's very unique to them individually. And that's where it also ties into that third point, which is no student's aid is the same, because it's based on their unique circumstances, and they have to apply for aid every single year. You don't get financial aid if you don't apply for it. So it's really crucial that students remember, it's not like admission where you apply once and you're in the college or you're in that school. Students have to apply for financial aid every single year that they plan to use that funding. How the financial aid process works. So we are in October. It is October 28th. That means that we are 28 days into the financial aid cycle. So every year the financial aid applications open on October 1st, both FAFSA and WASFA. For students who are applying for financial aid, it's going to use their tax information not from this year, but from the year before that. So they've called that prior year. Every year it sort of adjusts. So you'll see that for the class of 2021, which is this year's seniors, they are using their tax information from 2019. And as I mentioned before, FAFSA and WASFA follow the exact same deadline or timeline. So I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but what is unique to Washington State is that we have 2 financial aid applications. And what's really important to know is that each application is specific and designed to support students in the appropriate manner. So why I am very, very clear about what the student needs to use is because it's very sensitive. So for our students who are US citizens or eligible non-citizens, permanent residents, things like that, those students are going to apply with the FAFSA because they're eligible to be reviewed for federal aid and state aid. When they apply for financial aid with the FAFSA, it automatically reviews them for both federal and state aid simultaneously. For our students who are undocumented, our students who do not have a federal status but are Washington residents, they would apply for financial aid with the Washington application for state financial aid. So I want to make this clear because you don't want an undocumented student doing the federal form. When we have our students that are US citizens, but their parents are undocumented, they would do the FAFSA because those students are eligible for federal aid. So my rule of thumb is never assume what application is appropriate for the student. The student needs to determine what application is appropriate for them. So we have a very simple questionnaire that is at the WASFA. So if you go to that website, which is highlighted on your screen here, which is that readysetgrad.org/WASFA, there a student should go through that start a new WASFA, and it asks them about 5 questions. And at the end of those questions, it will populate them to the appropriate application. So if it goes through and says, looks like you need to start your WASFA, you go in, you create your username and password, and then you get started. It will say, looks like you need to do the FAFSA, and it will tell them to go to the main federal student aid website so they can start their application as well. So I want to reiterate, if you don't know, and we don't know what that student's financial aid application is, you need to have them go to that questionnaire because it will take them to the appropriate place. Some very basic rules, as I mentioned before, the applications open on October 1st every single year. For students applying this year, they're using their 2019 income. And then the one thing that's really important to know is that when students are applying for aid, not only are they using tax information not from this year, but the year before that, they are applying for the upcoming academic year. So it gets really confusing. We have a lot of students apply for financial aid using the wrong application year because they think, oh, I'm the class of 2021, so I do the 2021 financial aid application. And that is not the appropriate application. You want them to apply for the upcoming academic year. We also encourage students to apply for financial aid as early as possible because once you start that process, earlier is better. So that way it gives you a bit more time to walk through and get through the process without having to stress about the upcoming start of the year. So I think this is a very good stopping point. I want to check in with the room and see if you guys have questions.
Hi, are we allowed to just ask the questions?
Yeah, of course.
So let's say we have a student that's undocumented, or not, not undocumented, but students whose parents happen to be undocumented, and I know that for the FAFSA, your parents have to sign for it and do all this stuff, and I don't know if the FAFSA will allow students who don't have that requirement to make an account. Do you know what would be the best way to help the students out?
That's a fantastic question. Yes. So for our students who are US citizens, but their parents are not, right? So our students who have mixed status families, what they can do is they can complete the financial aid application. They will have to do a signature page. So they won't be able to go through that process of completing it with the digital signature page, but they will have to do it on paper. And what's really important is for our parents that do not have a social security number to not make one up or use your ITIN number. Don't do that. You need to use all zeros, and you need to input that not once, not twice, but 3 times. So the system is designed to allow those students to go through the process. It is not as intuitive as I would like it to be. So that means that the student goes in, they put in their parents' social security number with all zeros, and then they hit enter, and it's not going to say anything. It's just going to sit there. They have to do it again, and they have to do it again. And then it says, oh, it looks like this is what you're trying to do, and we'll take them to that next step. We don't, unfortunately, the only way we've known how to do that is because our 12th year campaign lead, Christina Winstead, is amazing, and she does the financial aid application every single year. So we troubleshoot this, and we walk through this process to ensure we know what our students and their families are working with. So that's where they can go through this process. They can complete it with the physical page or signature page, and they have to put in the all zeros 3 times.
Okay. And then, sorry, but if they have to make a change, let's say they misspelled something, Does that mean that they have to send that signature page every time they make a correction?
No, they shouldn't have to re-sign it every time, but what will happen is that if that student has made a change on their FAFSA, they will probably be selected for verification, which I will talk about later, which is a process in which either the federal government or the institution or the college is going to say, hey, you put this information on here, we want to verify that this is correct. So they may be asked to provide additional information, but they shouldn't have to resubmit that signature page.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quick question. Hi, my name is Kathy.
Hi, Kathy.
What do you recommend when a student originally thought they were eligible for FAFSA, submitted a FAFSA, and then realized they need to do a WASFA? Like, is there anything else you need to do to kind of cancel that FAFSA?
We can't, unfortunately, because that sits with the federal government or the Department of Education. What we recommend is they just start the WASFA, and we can't go back into the FAFSA and take that information out. So that's why what we find, it's very, very common for our undocumented students to not know they're undocumented until they are applying for college admission and financial aid. So if you are working with those students, you might be the first person who discovers it with them. So we want to be mindful, be sensitive and empathetic to those students, and just let them know that if they discover this, probably as they are working on creating their FSA ID, which I'll talk about in a second, they realize like, oh, it says my social security number is not populating or something's not right. That is where they can sort of stop the process before they complete it and hit submit, because you can initiate a financial aid application and start the FSA ID process, but if you don't complete the process within 45 days, it will wipe the slate clean on that student's financial aid application, which is good in this scenario, but not great for our students who start the application and don't finish it and have to redo the whole thing later.
Okay, great, thank you. I'm particularly thinking about a student who was in the process of getting permanent residency, and so they had a social and they had that whole thing, but then they just did not actually have the green card yet, so did not have the alien registration number.
Okay, yeah, and so then you would just have the student apply with the WASFA for that year, and then once they have their federal status, then they would do the FAFSA the next year.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, do you have time for one more question?
I do.
Great. So I have worked in the past with a student who was not eligible for FAFSA and also was not eligible for WASFA. And I'm wondering what is available, because they hadn't lived in Washington for more than, I think it's 4 years. And so I'm just wondering what's available to students that are in that situation.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so one thing that we do have that is, it's a combination of a few different things. So we have a few resources. We refer students to connect with the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project. And there is a really great student-led conference called Beyond HB 1079. If you're not familiar with HB 1079, that's just House Bill 1079 that established in 2003 that students in Washington, regardless of their federal status, should be eligible to provide or demonstrate Washington state residency. So it enables our undocumented students to access in-state tuition rates. And then a few years ago, we passed the WASFA, which now allows those students to access state financial aid opportunities. Now, if you have, like you just mentioned, a student who doesn't meet that residency requirement, the Beyond 1079 conference is a student-led conference that happens annually. Due to COVID, I'm not quite sure what they've done to plan for 2020 and 2021, but this is for students at the middle, high school, and college level, where they come together, they provide information, they do resource sharing, they do networking, and they have a whole list of scholarships that they have collected that does not use residency or citizenship status as an indicator at all. And there's that sort of built-in network. And that is where we've referred students to check in with those students, because it's more of that grassroots led from the students up and networking out, because that network is really powerful. So that's where we've usually encouraged students is to connect with Beyond 1079 and the Northwest Immigrant Rights Project.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Okay, I'm going to stop again in a few minutes. Oh,
Sorry,
go ahead.
One more question. Someone raised their hand. Trista had a question.
Hi, yes. This is actually going back a little bit. So I've been completing the FAFSAs with quite a few students recently whose parents do not have socials, and it actually isn't stopping them right at that point where you would click next. It lets them go almost all the way through right before the sign and submit, and that's where it's throwing that check error. I have not yet had it at the point of where we enter all the zeros. And so I didn't know if maybe that's just a glitch, and because I was telling students the same thing and they were going, that's not
Maybe
happening.
the federal student aid changed it. Maybe they made a change and they didn't tell us that that's what they did. So thank you for reminding me, because sometimes when we go through this process, they make changes and updates, and that's not something they told us that they were going to do. And for earlier in this year, we were still seeing students having to do it multiple times. So thank you for letting me know, Trista. Would you mind, my contact information will be at the end of this. Would you mind following up with me so that way I can update Christina on my team, so that way we have up-to-date, accurate information when we're sharing it out with folks that we're training?
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, I was saying the same thing, but it wasn't happening at that exact point. It was happening a little bit later in the application. So I will definitely reach out to you.
Perfect. Thank you. So hot tip for the room, it's not just going through it 3 times. It seems like it's happening later. So just know, with those students whose parents don't have that social security number, it's going to give them an error. Now it just looks like it's happening later on in the process. Okay. I'm going to keep rolling along. We've got, we're about a third of the way through. So I'll stop and if we have more questions along the way. Okay. So kind of starting with the FAFSA, there are 3 ways for a student to apply. There is the website, there is the Federal Student Aid app, and then there is the paper application. Here's what I'm going to say about the paper application. It's really not useful for a lot of students. It's really only in those special circumstances where we encourage a student to do the paper FAFSA. It's hard to get a hold of those. The FAFSA app does work. I made my husband do it. I've done it. It is useful. It does not allow you to have 2 people simultaneously working on the same financial aid application. I say that because there is a student component, and then if you're working with a student who is connected with their parent, there is the parent component, and you can't simultaneously kind of double down and do it together. So if you do the FAFSA app on the phone application, it will be 1 at a time. And then the most common is the website. So this is probably what you've seen most frequently, but there are 3 ways to apply for students who do the FAFSA. So next is the WASFA. It's very similar for our students who are applying for aid, but it has this section where it says, if you're a new user, you come in here, you start a new WASFA, and you would just apply at our website. But what's really important here is that I mentioned that questionnaire. So if you're saying, I don't know which application my student should do, this is where you want to start. You want to click on this, start a new WASFA, and it will kind of populate you through those quick questions to get that student to the appropriate application. Okay. So here are some examples of the federal financial aid programs that are available to students. It's not exhaustive, it's just the most common. So most common, you have the Pell Grant, federal versions of work study, subsidized and unsubsidized loans. So subsidized meaning that the interest is subsidized by the federal government, so the student is not incurring interest when they take the loan out until after they're no longer enrolled. Unsubsidized means it's accruing interest from the second they take out that loan. And then there are loans for parents to take out as well. Here are some very common mistakes that we find when students are doing the FAFSA or their financial aid applications. They have misspelled or not put in the appropriate legal name. So we don't want to use nickname, we want to use the legal name. We also want to use their social security number. We have seen this where students don't know what it is and they guess. And that is not great, because it is not easy to go back into the FAFSA to appropriately assign the student the correct social security number. They have to actually call in to go through that process, and it takes a long time. So if your student does not know their social security number, don't let them guess. Make sure they either have that someplace or they have their card within reach so they can check it. Very common mistake is doing the incorrect FAFSA or a WASFA year. So we are really, really careful. Like I mentioned before, for the class of 2021, they're going to do the 21-22 financial aid application. We lovingly call the practice FAFSA the one you do for the year that you're graduating, because we have lots of students who said, yeah, I did my FAFSA, it's complete, but I'm not seeing anything. And we go into the website and we see that they did the wrong year. So just wanted to let folks know it's common, it happens. What is nice about the FAFSA is it does pre-populate some of that general information over, but they will have to re-enter in that income information and all of that. So Practice FAFSA, not fun, but it does happen. The correct tax year is also a really big thing. So that's why that prior year is kind of a sticky wicket. So you just want to remind students that when they're applying for financial aid, check the app year, check the tax year. And then we want to make sure that we're using the correct parent information for dependent students. This happens, who's my parent, who's my guardian? It can be kind of a complex thing. So we just want to be mindful of that. We've already talked about all zeros if the parent doesn't have a social security number. And then this last one is not finishing the financial aid process. So you might see that students have gone through, gotten maybe about 90% or even 60% of the way, and then something happened, they had to step away from their computer, they weren't able to complete it. And I mentioned this before, if a student walks away, does not complete the application, after 45 days, the application will be wiped clean and they will have to start all over again from scratch. So to do that is not fun. So we just want to make sure to follow up, go through it all the way and not have to duplicate work. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about why you came here today. You came to learn more about some state financial aid opportunities. So we're starting with, here are the most common forms of state financial aid that you will see. The Washington College Grant, which I'm going to go into some depth in a moment. The College Bound Scholarship, which is that early commitment of state financial aid. I will talk about that briefly as well. There's the state version of work study, the Passport to Careers, which is actually pretty crucial for our foster youth and our McKinney-Vento students. So this is supporting those students specifically into getting them into higher education or into apprenticeship-based training programs. Then there's the Opportunity Grant, which is at our community and technical colleges. So this is not the exhaustive list, but this is just sort of most commonly what you would see for students in Washington State in terms of financial aid programming. So Washington College Grant. This is still very new. So last year was the very first year of the Washington College Grant. And so previously it was the State Need Grant. So you may have heard State Need Grant, SNG, and that was a first come, first served basis for students to apply for financial aid. We had more students than we could provide funding for. And that was a big challenge for us and a real equity issue that we wanted to address. So we were able to get the Washington College Grant through the legislature. And I say we, it's not my agency, but the state. So we were able to have the Washington College Grant passed and put into place starting in 2020. And this has been really fantastic because what this means is that students in Washington State are guaranteed their state financial aid, whereas they were not guaranteed that before. It was first come, first serve. And it has expanded eligibility. So to show you a graph, to kind of give you an idea, is that over the course of the 1920 and 2021, you can't say biennial, but over this time, we've increased state financial aid funding pretty substantially. And really what this means is we've increased the number of students who can access aid and how they access that aid because income guidelines have shifted. So to give you an idea, it kind of varies by size, student size, but they've expanded the income eligibility up to 100% of the median family income chart, which is a very fun chart you'll see in just a second. So to give you a scope of what this might mean is for an eligible student with a family size of 4 to get a full award of the Washington College Grant, which goes up to the full tuition of the University of Washington. That family would be making $53,000 a year or less. For that same family of 4, if their income was higher and they were eligible to get that prorated award or that partial award, that family of 4's annual income would be $97,000 a year. And those students would be eligible to receive some form of gift or grant aid from state financial aid. That was not the case before, so this expansion is quite impactful for our middle income families, but it's also great for our students who are low income because it guarantees their funding no matter when they apply for financial aid. So if you wanted to see, well, what does that chart look like to get more depth on that, I have it included here. So this is just kind of walking you through based on where that family falls in that median family income chart. For that full award, that family would have to meet the median family income cap at between 66 and 70% of the income chart. So looking right here. And then this is for, you can see how it was a slow implementation between 2019 and now 2020. So now our students who are eligible all the way up to 100%, they get that 10% award starting in this academic year. So it's expanded eligibility. You have access to this chart. It is published on our website if you wanted to see it. This is sort of more of that nitty-gritty. To give you an idea of what the Washington College Grant award amounts look like. So I am sort of demonstrating what this looks like for our 2-year schools or community and technical schools. So for a maximum award amount in last year's cohort, that would be a student who's attending full-time, attending for 3 quarters or 2 semesters. They would be getting $4,100 to be able to complete their associate's degree, or if they're doing that applied bachelor's degree at the CTC, it would go up to $6,500. So the Washington College Grant is used to cover those educational costs. So that's done by, of course, the college, but it's the tuition, some of those required fees and things like that. To give you another example of what these awards look like, I just wanted to really kind of beat it home. So you can see, well, what does this look like? Based on median family income, based on where they are attending. So if that student is in this year, they are within the 51 to 55% of the median family income, they'd get that full award. But if that family is a little bit higher on that scale, the award would be prorated and up to $400 for the year.
Yokiko, we have one question in the chat. Someone is asking, do you have income guidelines for other household sizes?
Oh yes, this is just for 4. We have the whole gamut. So it goes from like 1 all the way up to I think 12, and that's posted online. So I'd be happy to share that with you all. So that way you get an idea of what that looks like. Okay, I'm gonna stop right here. Do you all have questions about the Washington College Grant?
There is another question in the chat. Maria Rebecca wants to know, can you please specify elements of COA will the Washington College Grant cover?
Right, so that's going to cover the cost of attendance, so the tuition rate up to the University of Washington's tuition rate. So I say that because our students in Washington can attend our private colleges, our independent colleges of Washington, like University of Puget Sound, Gonzaga, Whitworth, across the state. And so it will cover up to that highest tuition award amount of University of Washington. And it's covering tuition. It will cover some of those required fees for the student. But then there are other forms of financial aid would cover things like room and board, right? So I like to think of Washington College Grant as it's covering those big expenses, and similar to College Bound covers only 3 things. Washington College Grant can cover some of that room and board expenses or those other fees. College Bound is very, very, very particular, and I will talk about that as you can see it on your screen. Okay. So I just saw Stephanie's question in the chat. Does a student still qualify for the Washington College Grant if they attend a school outside of Washington? No. So because it's a form of state financial aid, it is limited to Washington state. So what that does mean, though, is that say the student is a resident of Washington, they go out of state and they decide, I want to go to school in Oregon or Florida, wherever they might decide to go, and then they end up coming back to Washington, if they're still a Washington resident because they were only attending that institution as a student, not as a resident. So they would be eligible to be reviewed for state financial aid when they come back to a Washington state institution. If the student is not a resident of Washington, they're not going to be eligible to receive this because the state financial aid is specifically for our Washington state residents. So hopefully that answers your entire question. Okay, great. Any other questions before I move on to College Bound? All right, I'm going to keep moving forward, but if you have questions, again, put them in the chat, stop me anytime. So College Bound, this is really unique. This is my most favorite program because it's the one that I work with. But College Bound is unique because it is that early commitment of state financial aid to students who apply in middle school between 7th and 8th grade. We do have a limited number of 9th grade students who are eligible to apply, and those are students who were in Washington, not eligible during that window of time, but now in 9th grade are. And then the other group of eligible students are our foster youth students. So if they are in care for even up to 1 day in Washington State, they are automatically enrolled into the scholarship. We have a partnership with Department of Children, Youth, and Families. I always can get it mixed up with their old name, but we have that data sharing agreement. So we get these students automatically enrolled into the scholarship anywhere from grade 7 all the way up to age 21, so long as they don't have their high school diploma. And so these students are automatically college bound eligible. The College Bound Scholarship combines with other forms of state aid like the Washington College Grant, but it covers 3 very specific things. It is the cost of tuition at public college rates. So that maximum award would be the University of Washington's tuition. And it covers the tuition, the required fees at that school, and then a book allowance up to $500. So that college bound commitment is meant to cover really the big bulk of a student's expenses while they are in school, excuse me. And because it's a form of state financial aid, like the Washington College Grant, it can be used at over 60 colleges in our state, across the state. They are 2-year, they are 4-year, they are public, they are private, they are certification programs. There is a wide variety of how students can access the College Bound Scholarship. So we don't want students to feel limited by what they can do or what they can access with College Bound. And the same applies to the Washington College Grant for that matter. We don't want students to feel like, oh, well, if I get the Washington College Grant, I have to go to a 4-year school, because for a lot of students, that's not the right trajectory for them, and that's not the right degree plan or pathway. So students should be able to have the freedom to either start at the 4-year level, start at the 2-year level, transfer between schools, so long as they're attending one of our eligible schools. That's really what we care about.
Yokiko, there's a question in the chat box, a couple of questions.
Okay.
Is the College Bound Scholarship available to undocumented or refugee students?
It is. So citizenship status does not affect a student's ability to access College Bound. What's really important to know is that a student can be undocumented and access College Bound so long as they apply for the scholarship when they're in middle school. So if they don't apply for it, then they won't access College Bound. They will be eventually reviewed for the Washington College Grant. And but if they have, so students who meet 1079 or students who have DACA status can access, because that meets the residency standard for accessing College Bound.
And then there's a couple others. Is College Bound available for youth and federal foster care? And then the other question is, how do you know which are the colleges that are eligible?
That's a great, so I'll start with the list of eligible colleges is posted on our website. I will be happy to put that in the chat at the end of the presentation today. But it covers all public 4 years, all the independent colleges of Washington, all community and technical colleges, and then the certification program. So it calculates to like 66, but I will give you the list. The other one for our federal foster care, I believe there was an expansion to this eligibility criteria to match what happens with setup and passport, but let me double check because I want to make sure. I don't want to give you inaccurate information. So I will follow up with that question. Okay. Got it. Okay. So what's important to know about College Bound is that, so some folks are saying, well, now that we have Washington College Grant, what is the benefit of College Bound? And I like to think of it as you're just giving a student more opportunities to access state financial aid opportunities in Washington. So the thing that makes College Bound unique is that early commitment, that early promise. So it's early engagement. When we have students who are in the process of getting ready to go through middle school, they're going to start working on their high school and beyond plan in 8th grade, working with their counselors, going through high school. It really is starting that conversation with the student and encouraging them to think about their future. It's really about that sort of early initiative with those students. And it's sort of, we have these sort of intervention-based practices included in College Bound because they apply in middle school. We try to keep in contact with them and reiterate to them what the College Bound promise or a College Bound commitment is, and then how they access it. And at the really the bottom line is specifically for College Bound does have an actual higher award because of that $500 book allowance. So that $500 book allowance does increase that award for a student if they can apply for it and complete the process in middle school. And then I just saw a question. Okay, yeah, I will definitely follow up with the foster care question. So One thing I want to kind of touch on really quickly, because College Bound is unique, there is eligibility criteria that a student has to meet. So what we have used is written into legislation that the family's income meets the USDA income chart. So that guideline is for students who are receiving free or reduced price lunch. So that's the income chart we use. They don't have to be receiving free reduced price lunch, but that's the income guideline. So if their family falls within that, they can apply and complete it. I mentioned before, if a student is a foster youth at any point in time between grade 7 and age 21, they're automatically enrolled. And then the other is that the student's family receives TANF benefits. And I see a question.
First question from Liliana. What happens when a youth no longer meets the income eligibility criteria in high school?
It's a great question. So this is where the USDA chart we used for in the beginning of accessing College Bound. What's unique about that is that we use the USDA chart, which is actually a little bit more of a stringent income guideline to access College Bound, or rather to apply for College Bound. But for a student to actually access it, it's using the median family income chart, which I know I'm talking income charts and it's all over the place, but the median family income chart is what is used to determine financial aid, which is actually a little bit more broad. So especially for College Bound, students can fall in and out of income eligibility throughout the 5 years time that they can access College Bound. So on the screen here, you're looking at the College Bound pledge, which is like, you got to graduate from a state high school with at least that 2.0 GPA, no felony convictions, be income eligible, and that's determined by your financial aid application, either the FAFSA or the WASFA. And then the student has to enroll in a school within 1 year of completing that high school diploma. And so I throw this out there because income eligibility changes. Like, because they do financial aid every single year, we sometimes have seen that students have applied for college and enrolled, and they've been given like a presidential scholarship, or they've gotten some sort of scholarship that pushes them over the threshold of eligibility for College Bound for 1 year, but then the next year they don't have that. Or mom and dad may have gotten a bonus 1 year because they had a change in jobs, they had that bonus. Well, that bonus isn't there the next year. So every year that that student applies for financial aid, they're going to be reviewed for it, and they may be eligible for College Bound. If they don't meet the income eligibility for College Bound, they will be automatically reviewed for the Washington College Grant. So they may not get College Bound, but the Washington College Grant would cover those expenses, or assist in covering those expenses.
Thanks.
Was there another question?
I think that was the end of our questions asked for right now.
Okay. Okay, so I talked about that pledge, 2.0, no felony convictions, apply for aid, enroll in a school within 1 year of graduation. There is another thing about College Bound, similar to other forms of financial aid, a student needs to maintain their eligibility by being in good standing. So I say that because there is that remain in good standing. That's determined by the school. So every school has a different GPA threshold. They have their code of conduct. So they just want to make sure that they are in good standing at their school. I also put out there that the College Bound scholarship, they have 5 years of time to use the scholarship, 4 years worth of funding. As I mentioned before, they can come in and out of income eligibility, but they're reviewed every single year. And then they have to apply for financial aid every single year, because you don't get College Bound unless you apply for financial aid, because it's that financial aid program. So that's kind of how that cookie crumbles once they're in school and maintaining their scholarship eligibility. Okay, so I'm going to stop right here. Do we have more questions?
Yes, we have 2 questions in the chat.
Okay.
First one, how would the Washington College Grant and College Bound Awards interact and affect each other on a school's financial aid award package?
Mm-hmm.
It's a 2-part question. Do you want to answer that one first?
Yeah, so College Bound and the Washington College Grant actually work together to ensure. So what you'll see is that Washington, what usually ends up happening is that if a student has College Bound, you will see that the College Bound is that last dollar. So it means that they'll say Washington College Grant covered XYZ, and then there's the College Bound scholarship. And sometimes we'll see that the College Bound scholarship is actually a little bit smaller than the Washington College Grant, because that means that it could be just the $500 book allowance, because the Washington College Grant covered the vast majority of those expenses, and then College Bound hit that last little bit of that threshold to ensure that it meets that commitment. Tuition, required fees, and the book allowance. So they work together and overlap one another to ensure that commitment is made.
Okay, and second part of that question, could you go into how the College Bound Scholarship stacks on other financial aid awards? And I know you just talked a little bit about that.
So yeah, so like for Passport, I think what's happening is that there's been a change in Passport, so then College Bound would kind of cover those remaining costs for our foster youth students or McKinney-Vento students. So it works together and it works in combination with like the Opportunity Scholarship, which is pretty prevalent in the, oh, my brain is not working anymore, but it does work with like the Opportunity Scholarship or other forms of aid. It's just making sure College Bound is only going to cover those three things that I mentioned before. So then the other aid will help cover those other additional costs.
And then next question, are youth in care on an ICPC placement in Washington State also automatically enrolled?
That is a great question. And I want to follow up with you because it's been a while since I've asked it and I want to double check. So if you could contact me to follow up on that one, I will get you the right answer. And I'll give you my contact information so that way you know how to get a hold of me.
Okay, that is it for questions in the chat as for right now, Yokiko.
Sweet. Okay. So here's the reason why I put this in here. If you haven't applied for financial aid recently, or if you have never applied for financial aid, or it's just something you want to be reminded of, there is a pretty standard process. So based on who you are, these are kind of the next steps. So students in the fall of their senior year are working on applying for college admission. They are looking at the schools they want to go to, and then they apply for admission. And then additionally, they apply for financial aid using the FAFSA or the WASFA. And then either if they do the FAFSA, they are followed up with the Department of Ed, or if they're doing the WASFA, it's with the Student Achievement Council with us. So that's where we say we need some additional documentation, or you need to press play or pause or something like that on your app. So students apply for college, apply for financial aid, and then keep an eye on their email inboxes to make sure that they are responding to requests from either the school or the financial aid administrators who are asking them for additional information. For the Department of Education and WASAC, so the feds maintain the FAFSA, we maintain the WASFA, and what we do is that essentially the applications themselves, they're just places where students input that information, and then it's disseminated to the appropriate school, right? So either it's the FAFSA or the WASFA, and then the students will say like, I'm applying to XYZ school, so then the FAFSA sends it there, and this exact same thing happens for the WASFA. So students saying, I'm applying for admission at XYZ school, and then the WASFA just sends that info directly to the financial aid office. And so we're just sort of like the middleman that makes sure it gets to the appropriate place. The colleges is really where a lot of this connection takes place. So the colleges notify the student what they're eligible for. So notifies them about they've received their financial aid application, answers questions about that student's financial aid, and then provides support to the student while they are in college. What's really important is that students will be followed up with by the colleges, usually through whatever system that school uses. So it's like their username, their portal, all of that is maintained through specifically that college, and every college does it their own way. So just reminding students to check their email that they've connected to their college of choice, and make sure that they're checking it all the time, because they will send them notifications, and there are crucial deadlines in there that you don't want them to miss. So, oh yeah, go ahead.
Someone in the chat is wondering if you are okay with sharing this PowerPoint out.
I am absolutely comfortable sharing this presentation with the world. I will happily share it.
Wonderful. Thank you. And we'll send out CSF Washington Passport Network. We'll send out links with all of the recordings and presentations within the coming weeks.
Okay. Okay, so now here is something that I want to talk about, because this is a really big barrier for a lot of students. Students are selected for verification. Verification is a process in which either the federal government or the college itself is saying, we want to verify the information you put on your FAFSA or your WASFA is what you say it is. and we need to follow up to make sure we have the appropriate information. This is a standard process. It is very common and there is a way in which you can navigate the process. I say that does not mean it is an easy, simple process to do, because for a lot of students, this is very scary because they are getting followed up with by the federal government or by their college. And so it can seem very scary, right? When you think about like verification, what does that mean? This is very anxiety inducing for our students. It is not uncommon for our students to feel like, well, I don't want to do this. They don't want me to go. And we see there is a thing, a term we use in higher ed a lot. It's called verification melt. And there is summer melt, which is where students admitted to that school, but for some reason between when they are admitted and when they end their senior year and before they enroll in school, something happens and they just don't get to that campus. And a very, very common reason that a student doesn't go to college is because of verification. So verification melt is a very big deal. So I talk about this because students will be selected. There is nothing I can do to stop them. There is nothing they can do to stop it, but students will be selected for verification either by the federal government or that college, as I mentioned before. There are different ways in which the student will be communicated with. They might get notified directly from the federal government. They might send them a notification, or the student may get an email about it, or they may get a physical letter. What's really important is the students need to send in that requested information as soon as possible, because there are timely deadlines in the verification process. And if students don't process it in time, they will lose financial aid opportunities. So I will say there are a ton of resources available to help students go through the verification process, but it is normal. I know it might seem complicated and it can be very stressful if you're trying to work with a student through the verification process. We hear you, we understand, but we want you to know that this is something we are very aware of and try to provide as many resources as possible, because the last thing we want is for a student who is eligible for aid, deserves that aid, should be going on to college, and they just don't because this process prevented them. We want to not have that be a thing. We want to eliminate as many barriers as possible, because this shouldn't be the reason why they don't go to school. So verification is real thing. Okay.
Question in the chat related to verification.
Oh yeah.
So for verifying independent staff, how can support staff help student access IRS non-flyer documents at this time?
So here's what I'm going to suggest for our independent students who are non-filers. I'm going to suggest that we connect you with our 12th year 12th year assistant director. Her name is Christina Winstead, because she is the person that I go to when I have questions about verification. So Christina Winstead, she does a 12th year campaign, and we work with students, supporting them through all of the processes. One thing that a student might be able to use right now is a tool called Swift Student. So Swift Student is an actual process that allows students, it gives them all of the tools they may need. It's totally free if they are selected for verification, and it gives them templates for letters that they can write or emails they can write or the processes they may use. So Swift Student, like Swift Trucking, right? SWIFT Student. And that's a really great resource to use. But I will also put in the contact information for the 12th year campaign, because especially for our independent students, we want to be really, really careful about how we're supporting them and getting them the right information. So that way our independent students don't have to fill out information about their parents because they checked the wrong box on the FAFSA or the WASFA. So I will follow up with you, or put Christina's information in the chat at the end of this presentation, not a document.
Okay, that's it for questions in the chat for now.
Okay, great. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some resources. So some really great resources we have is this this set of websites. So there's the Washington College Grant website here. There's the Plan Your Future page, and then learn more about financial aid. So what you're looking at here, these are actual buttons from our website. So the Washington College Grant page is there. We also have another one which I will feature in a little bit here. But we have a lot of information available for students, and we've developed some new websites to be able to be more student and family responsive. Previously, a vast majority of our audience was like legislators, other agencies, stakeholders, but now we're really having to take and target our messaging to our students because of the Washington College Grant, because of the nature of sort of the world that we're living in right now. So we have some resources specific to our students. The next one, which is always my favorite to talk about, is the Washboard. The Washboard is it's a platform we have which allows students to create a profile, and then it matches them with different scholarship opportunities based on the information they put in that profile. So I joke, we joke, it's very common that we say this is the eHarmony for scholarships, but instead of getting a date, they get a really great opportunity to potentially fund their education. So dollars over dates, in my opinion. But this is really great because students don't have to be a senior applying for college admission. You can do this at any point in time. You could be in middle school, you could be in high school, you could be in college and a continuing student. You shouldn't feel limited by wherever you are in your education to use the Washboard. But what's really important is that once students put that information into this platform, they have to check it because it's not automatically going to let them know what the deadlines are or when the deadline is coming up. But students can apply directly for scholarships through this website, and they can upload their personal statements, their student activities resume, and have that information all in one spot. And then if the application is housed at that specific scholarship opportunity, it will let the student know so they can apply that way. This is another list of scholarship search engines, which I think are pretty phenomenal. The first one is Gear Up Washington. If you have not connected with our Gear Up team, I highly encourage you to, because the Gear Up Washington team is phenomenal. And what they have done on their website is they do put the most upcoming deadline as the priority for scholarships listed. Beth, who is the lead on updating all of their content, is amazing. She's a wonderful resource, but she takes a lot of time to ensure that students have as many opportunities available to them as possible. You can also find information about how to support students as they're going through their college planning, applying for scholarships, applying for colleges. They have a family guidebook to kind of walk students through, like, well, what does it mean when you get to school? What should you be looking for? Another one that I will highlight is the FastWeb. When I was working in college admissions and working as an advisor, I encourage students to go to the FastWeb. And then Scholarship Junkies is another one that I've worked with a lot and I think is a really fantastic resource. But anyone on this list is a really great opportunity for students to explore. Okay. So I've just got a couple, I literally only have like 3 more slides left. So this one is just some other ways in which students can pay for school. I always put this out there because there are some students who have access to the college savings plans. Washington has the Get or the Dream Ahead. Students and their families may have jobs, like a student may be working on their own, making their own savings to help them pay for schools, but there's also payment plan options. So if a student, say, has a small bill that they need to pay, they can work out a payment plan with their colleges to make sure that they can still attend school, continue accessing classes, be able to register, but not having to pay the bulk of it all at once. They can do it over time, so they don't have to feel like they have to do it right away. This next slide is really just some, like, don't forget. So don't forget, when you're working with students, remind them to check their email, to check on their applications, respond to anything that they are sent by their college, by either the Student Achievement Council or the Federal Student Aid. Make sure they do it quickly. Apply for aid every single year. And this one is really, really critical because of 2020 and just how much of a dumpster fire is what I'm going to call it this year has been for so many of our students, for so many people and partners that we work with. Everybody is trying to figure out what this new normal looks like. So I know that there are so many students whose lives look different in 2020 than they did in 2019. So because of that long window of time in which students are using the tax information from 2019, or even if their circumstances in 2019 is how they're basing their financial aid in 2021, that reality is probably not the same. So what's really important is that our students who have a different reality than the one they are putting on their financial aid application, reach out to the financial aid office and let them know, because I say this all the time, they don't know what they don't know. And it's kind of one of those things where we have to have students, unfortunately, lead with the students telling the colleges and the offices that they need something different to kind of advocate for themselves. But this is sort of the way it has to work, because those college financial aid offices, they just don't know that student circumstance is any different unless they are told that it's different. And then there's a process for that office to be flexible. They have flexibility, probably more flexibility than we all think. So have them reach out to the financial aid office to let them know that we've seen it. There have been a loss in the family. There has been a loss of income. There has been changes into the number of people who are living in the household. Things have really, really looked different in 2020 than they did in 2019. So we are mindful of that. That's why we are encouraging students to reach out to the financial aid office, because there is a process, they call it the professional judgment, where the financial aid office can really look at and independently look at that student's application and give it the time and depth that it needs to be the appropriate financial aid award.
Yokiko, Trista
Yes.
has a question for you.
Of course.
So for WASFA students, are we just wanting to have them to resubmit that year's WASFA if things look different? Because I know that they were trying to have an area where people who are processing WASFA could have an edit button, but I didn't know when that would be coming out yet.
That's a great question. I only heard half of it because my audio cut out. Could you say it one more time for me?
Okay, sorry. And also my baby is she's throwing some voice in there. For WASFA students whose incomes are different, everything's looking different for them. How do we get them to update their income? I know, a lot of financial aid offices will do aid adjustments, but for WASFA students, financial aid offices can't get in there and make those updates. So are we wanting to have those WASFA students just resubmit their WASFAs for that year? How does that work?
So this is where I would encourage them to reach out to our WASFA team. So I would have them reach out to the WASFA inbox or call our office or follow up with us, because we can help make that adjustment to make sure that the institution knows, and we can do that sort of crossover or that overlap. So have that student reach out to the WASFA team at the Student Achievement Council.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Okay. This is the second to last slide before we just open it up to more questions. So I mentioned before that there's a really great website, which unfortunately, when I transferred it onto this slide, it's on 2 lines, but it's the wasac.wa.gov/action plan, not plan. And so that is just a really great resource for students to use, because it kind of walks them through what they need to do, where there are resources. That junior senior workbook on the right-hand side from the 12th year campaign, that is absolute gold, because it walks students through how to create their username and password, if they're doing the FSA ID, how to plot through their junior year. It's a really useful tool. And then we are doing statewide financial aid events. So if you're working with students and you're like, hey, I want to walk through the FAFSA or the WASFA with my students, or I'm looking for additional help, or I don't know when the advising day is at my school, or I'm supporting someone, these statewide events are completely open and available to all students in Washington. So those are posted on our 12th year website. We are hosting one later today, but just know that we have a lot of different statewide events that are happening virtually. So if you want to connect, ask questions, even if you have the time and capacity to volunteer to help other students apply for financial aid, we're looking for as many ways to connect as possible. So just know that website, the action plan, is great for students and their families. And then if they want to sign up, the 12th year website has that list of statewide financial aid events that are available. So if you haven't been able to attend one in your region, they are happening statewide. So last slide, which is just, if you ever have questions, or you think of something, or I talked about something and I went too quick, you can reach out. So my philosophy is, when in doubt, reach out. If you have questions, you want to follow up with me, please, by all means, do so. I'm the only Yokiko who works at the Student Achievement Council. I'm the only Yokiko who works with College Bound. I'm not hard to find. But the other thing about that is, when in doubt, reach out to your financial aid office and let them know and say, hey, I have this student, I have this scenario, I'm not quite sure what to do, I don't know where to go. that's my philosophy, is just like extend a hand or throw out that email, or just talk to whomever you know. I mean, if that's an admissions counselor, they are often much more able to navigate the backside of the offices to get you in the right door. So that's my philosophy. If you have questions, I am happy to help get you in the right spot or get you the answer.
So you have two questions in the chat. The first is the workbook that you just discussed. Is it available in any other languages?
Absolutely, it is available. I believe it is available in Spanish. I'm not sure if it's available in more languages, because a lot of our 12th year stuff is available in up to 5. But I can't remember off the top of my head, but I know it is available in other languages, yes.
Okay, next question. This might be a silly question, I'm sure it's not, but do students in foster care that are going into EFC when they turn 18 need to put their biological family income information into the FAFSA and WASFA?
So that's a great question. It's not a silly question. So with our students who are independent, it will ask them if they are independent. Kind of, I can't remember where it is in the process, but it will ask them if they're independent, and then they will say, do you want to provide their parent information? And if that student is independent, they do not, right? Because their EFC is dependent upon their own income, because they're completely independent. So they wouldn't be including their biological family's income there. It's just really important for the student to make sure, if they are considered independent, to not click I want to provide parent information, because we have seen this where it's not safe, right? It's not appropriate for a student to reach out to their family to get that information, and we don't want to put them in an unsafe situation in order for them to access aid. So not a silly question at all.
I have a quick question, if it's okay to ask it over. Okay, it's just typing it sounded complicated. So I work with international foster youth, which their situation is usually pretty complicated. And so I am wondering, and again, this might be a dumb question because I feel like I should know this, but so they're independent, right? So we're not counting, and so that's what because I've been helping them do their FAFSAs recently. A couple of our students who actually qualify. They're independent, but there is another question later on in the FAFSA asking about legal guardians, and our organization is their legal guardian. So should I be clicking yes that they have a legal guardian, or no that they don't, because they're independent?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a fantastic question. And that's one where I'm actually going to refer you to connect with Christina Winstead. So I'm going to put her information in here.
Okay. Yeah, I got to that question and I was like, I don't know.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And it's really important. I want you to connect with Christina Winstead. So she's Christina. You're seeing my thinking brain, sorry. Okay, so Christina Winstead, she's amazing. She is the 12th year campaign. I'm copying and putting in here the link to the 12th year campaign website. So I was talking about the statewide financial aid events and all of that. So there, you can find all of this information as well. But then I just wanted to double check. So you have her information. I would reach out to Christina specifically about this, because this is where we want to make sure that we're doing it appropriately, and we don't want that student to be like going through the process and we click the wrong button. What I will say is that the financial aid applications do allow you to go back in and fix it. So it's not permanent. It's not permanent. A student can go back in, they can change the schools, they can change their contact information. If you do make a change, you are likely to be selected for verification. So just know that going in, just because if you make that change, it's going to be like, oh, why did you do that? I want to know what that's about.
Okay, our students get selected for verification pretty regularly because of their complicated status. So
yes,
that's okay. Thank you for letting me know. I appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. So Laura Jenkins' question is a really great question. And again, I'm going to refer you to Christina Winstead, because that's where it gets a little bit more into the nitty-gritty in depth. And she's got more experience answering that question than I do. So hopefully you can see your contact information in the chat, but it's christinaw@wasac.wa.gov. I want to make sure you connect with her, because she is a lot more experienced in answering those specific questions, especially around dependency status, independent, who is the parent, all of that. She's very, very good. Okay. So I'm going to put my email in here as well. And you can connect with me anytime if you have any additional questions. I don't want to cut us short if we're not done yet, but just know you can reach out to me. I'm happy to answer your questions, especially anything basic financial aid, anything around the College Bound Scholarship. We are really here to help and be a resource for you, for the students that you're working with. We want to be providing more opportunities for students in Washington. So any way that I can be a part of doing that, I'm happy to do. But I want to thank you so much for sitting with me, talking with me, letting me know what your questions are, because they're really good questions and we want to make sure that we're doing it right.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Yokiko, for joining us today and answering so many questions. Obviously, this is an extremely important topic, and we're really grateful to have your expertise and have you share your knowledge. So thank you for being with us today.
Absolutely. And then my presentation, we are happy to share with everybody, anybody, everybody, all the time. Let me know what you need.
Awesome. Well, if there are no other questions, let me check the chat here. A lot of gratitude. Thank you. Thanks again, Yokiko. We'll go ahead and end this meeting, and at 2:30, you all have been pre-assigned to regional breakout groups. So feel free to join that